Tonight, in the trial of Oscar Pistorius, a forensic psychiatrist gives the court details about his difficult childhood.
His mother was a very anxious person and abused alcohol intermittently. She slept with her firearm under her pillow.
And how that has led to a troubled mental state.
Mr. Pistorius has an anxiety disorder.
A man suffering from an anxiety disorder which began when he was a young boy.
Mr. Pistorius has a long history of generalized anxiety disorder that appears to have been increasing with time.
That's how Oscar Pistorius was described to the court. A lonely child with an alcoholic mother, missing father, and struggling to cope with a severe disability.
At the age of 6, his parents divorced, resulting in drastic changes in his social circumstances. His mother had to start working. There were financial problems. His father did not always contribute to their support. And from his description and that of his siblings, his father was an irresponsible and mostly absent parent. It appears that his mother was a very anxious person and abused alcohol intermittently. She slept with her firearm under her pillow, and there were frequent episodes when the police were called in to investigate noises she had heard. It appears that the children were not soothed by their mother, but rather that they all developed features of anxiety. The children were reared to see their external environment as threatening. And instead of the mother being in a position, if there was a threat, to relieve her children's anxiety, she added to the anxiety. At the age of 15, when he was in Standard 7 or Grade 9, his mother died suddenly. He was significantly traumatized by her death. The death of his mother appears to have resulted in an increase in Mr. Pistorius's anxiety levels. He had a loss of his primary attachment figure. He describes this as a very stressful period in his life. After the death of his mother, Mr. Pistorius had no adult primary attachment figure, although he describes his relationship with his siblings as very close.
The forensic psychiatrist who made the evaluation was called as a defence witness, Dr. Merrill Vorster choosing to remain anonymous. She began her testimony by describing a child too young to understand the trauma of a double below-the-knee amputation.
This surgery would have been performed at pre-language level developmental stage. Mr. Pistorius would not have understood why he was in hospital or why he was having surgery.
If I may ask you, Doctor, your reference to the pre-language developmental stage and him not being aware at the time of the nature and course of the surgery, what is the significance of that?
That he wouldn't have been able to understand why he was in hospital, why he was having an operation. There presumably would have been pain associated with the procedure, and he would not have been able to be soothed by his mother, comforted by his mother as he was pre-language. And so this type of procedure at this age is perceived by infants as a traumatic assault. He was fitted with his prosthetic limbs shortly after that and was able to walk with them by the age of 17 months. His parents always encouraged him to behave and appear as normal as possible, and he was never restricted from participating in any form of physical activity.
Is there any significance in the encouragement to behave and appear as normal as possible in relation to this matter?
He was never able to allow himself to be seen as being disabled. So he's always encouraged to be seen as being normal.
Has that any relevance to anxiety, for instance?
Yes, over time, this could result in increasing levels of anxiety as the stress of appearing normal continue.
At 16, a rugby accident led to track running as part of his rehabilitation. It was a discovery that would change Oscar Pistorius' life forever.
Within a few months, his performance improved exponentially. He got a coach and had formal sports training, and he started running competitively. When he was in Standard 9 or Grade 11, he was competing internationally, was earning money and was becoming financially independent.
But with this newfound fame came more anxiety, more stress. The young Pistorius found it difficult to cope.
He's now this athlete, he's performing well. Where does the anxiety come in and how did it manifest?
It is my opinion, my lady, that Mr. Pistorius has an anxiety disorder. Individuals with an anxiety disorder work hard to control their environment and be very prepared in order to alleviate their levels of anxiety. In a way, his strict training regime and his diet helped him to alleviate his levels of anxiety. On the other hand, as he became more and more exposed to being famous and having media attention, he would have had to prepare more and more to not embarrass himself in any way, and in that way to manage his levels of anxiety.
The racing kept Oscar Pistorius away from South Africa, but that made the athlete anxious about violence back home. He feared for his own safety and that of his sister Amy. It led to him buying his first gun.
He reports being anxious about the high levels of violent crime in South Africa as reported by the media and as discussed within his immediate and extended family setting. He bought a firearm for his own protection.
What is the relation between the concern about safety and the anxiety that he has?
Well, there are two relationships, my lady. The one is that as one is increasingly anxious, one feels more and more insecure about one's personal safety, even though factually one's safety may not be threatened. So by having increased levels of anxiety, you perceive your surroundings as being threatening when maybe they aren't. And if one is then placed in an environment where indeed you are not safe, again your anxiety levels increase. While in South Africa, he describes having increased levels of anxiety, worry about being followed, worried about the security of his home. He moved into a housing estate believing this would be a more secure environment, but subsequently there were reports of break-ins there. He tried to increase the security of his house, and his routine was to sleep with his bedroom door locked. He describes always being hypervigilant. He describes having had a sleep disturbance, waking often if he thought there was a noise or a threat. He was aware that he was a public figure and believed that this made him at an increased risk of being attacked or burgled.
When you refer to hypervigilance, what does it mean in a context?
Hypervigilance is somebody that is overvigilant. So they're constantly looking around, scanning their surroundings for any kind of threat.
And how would this link up with the anxiety that he suffers from?
It is a feature of anxiety.
Oscar Pistorius' remorse has been questioned by the prosecution. Is it genuine or is it an act to elicit sympathy? Here's what Dr. Vorster told the court.
He was distressed, crying and retching. He stated that he had no intention of shooting Miss Steenkamp and he feels devastated that he killed his girlfriend.
Now, in your profession, the reactions that you saw, the emotions that you saw, could you venture an opinion whether they were real, genuine, or that he feigned it, perhaps?
In my opinion, they were genuine.
Why is that?
Well, particularly the retching, and I do refer to it in the next paragraph, my lady. If one had to feign retching, then one would develop perhaps a hoarse voice, redness in the face, maybe some tears. What Mr. Pistorius showed while I was examining him and he was retching, he showed a pallor. That is, he became pale and he sweated profusely. This cannot be feigned. This is a sympathetic manifestation of anxiety. That is why I believe that his distress was genuine.
Oscar Pistorius rose to worldwide fame, competing with and beating able-bodied men on the racetrack, his blades openly shown to millions around the world. But despite this, the Paralympian still had problems exposing his disability in more personal situations.
His capacity to walk without his prosthesis is poor, his balance is poor, and he could easily be pushed over. His physical vulnerability was immediately apparent.
Any relevance in the physical vulnerability in relation to his anxiety?
I think they go hand in hand, my lady. His physical vulnerability makes him more anxious. His anxiety makes him want to conceal his physical vulnerability.
Oscar Pistorius was portrayed as a boy who struggled through childhood with an anxiety disorder that would never leave him. But this, according to the prosecution, is more than a condition. Harry Nell says he wants Oscar Pistorius to undergo a full psychiatric evaluation. Find out next what that could mean for the Oscar Pistorius murder trial. Beginning his cross-examination of forensic psychiatrist Dr. Merrill Vorster, the state prosecutor Harry Nell tried to establish whether she was saying that Pistorius had a mental illness and if he should be referred for psychiatric evaluation.
If you say that there's a possibility that he suffered from a diminished responsibility, then he has to be referred today for mental observation in terms of the provisions of 70.
His reaction to situations would be different based on his generalized anxiety disorder and his vulnerability. So his reaction is not that of a normal, able-bodied person without a generalized anxiety disorder. It's not as though he has a mental illness that perhaps he had a delusion about people entering his house. I'm not saying that at all.
You were called by the defense and you linked this generalized anxiety disorder to the incident. And that is what 78 deals with. If you link a disorder to the incident, then it becomes, then the court has no option but shall refer. That's how I understand it.
Well, I think the generalized anxiety disorder is relevant to the facts, and so it would be for the court to decide if that constitutes a mental illness or whether there is sufficient doubt and whether the accused should be referred for observation.
Yeah. Am I correct in saying that you got involved with your first interview on the 2nd of May?
That is correct, my lady.
You know that the 2nd of May was after the accused testified, after he was cross-examined, after his experts testified, and 2 of them were cross-examined. You know that?
Yes, I do.
That a person suffering from a general anxiety disorder would be a danger to society if he has access to a gun.
Yes.
If there's a psychiatrist giving evidence that the psychiatrist made a finding, a diagnosis of generalized anxiety disorder, and in evidence, the psychiatrist indicates that it's relevant to the accused's defense and could have played a role and should be taken into account by the court. It's way more, with the utmost respect, than an allegation. It's evidence that's been led. I know that Mr. Roux would say, please don't take it in that so serious. We never meant it to be this serious. But it's a factor. It's before this court. We have a psychiatrist that made a finding, a diagnosis. Otherwise, my lady, with the utmost respect, why was this placed before you? It cannot be placed before you to say, take something into account. What? It's a psychiatrist. She makes findings on mental defects, and the defense decided to lead it.
She's not saying that he could not appreciate the wrongfulness, he could not act
accordingly. It's a factor to be taken into account. When you're very small and you get attacked and the court must consider self-defense, it's a factor. I'm just using a physical. So you can see when a person is very nervous, at the end, the court will take that into account. And that's all. But what the state's doing, it's elevating the answers to something else. And it's saying, contrary to the witness's answer,
Just hold on.
that it was an incapacity. That's not a witness's evidence. She specifically denied it.
I am now dealing with the fact that I asked you what the purpose of the report is, and you indicated that is to indicate to court certain psychiatric factors that may be relevant, and you said for conviction and sentence. Now, relevant for conviction means that it affected his capacity to act in accordance with his understanding. Otherwise, that would not have been mentioned by you.
That's correct.
Well, if that's the answer, then it's the end of the argument.
To summarize, if I may, to put that if he was afraid that there was an intruder, then certainly having a generalized anxiety disorder would have affected the way he reacted to that fear.
And that is so relevant to his version. And I'm not saying his version is correct. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying that the defense, in having called you as a witness, have now caused the court to refer the accused.
On his version,
Yes. Yeah.
it is relevant.
Yeah. Good. This court will not have an option but to refer Mr. Pistorius for mental observation for 3 days.
In terms of?
Section 78. I'm sure it wasn't the intention by Mr. Root to have his client referred, but it is, it's in the report. Excluding the psychopaths, excluding them, normal people. That's what's expected. Deep remorse after you've done something that you think I should never have done.
That is correct.
Good.
From a psychiatric perspective, he is certainly aware that he fired the shots that caused Ms. Teerkamp's death, and that he is distressed about her death, and that he feels guilty that he caused her death.
He thought there was an intruder.
That's what he told me, yes.
He then armed himself
Yes,
and he approached the danger
yes,
to sort the danger out.
yes.
That's it. Now, Doctor, having been involved in lots of matters, when he armed himself, he at least then foresaw the possibility that he might have to shoot. Because otherwise, why would he arm himself and approach the danger? Am I right?
Well, he must have.
He must have foreseen the possibility that he
He may have to shoot.
may have to shoot.
Yes, some anxious people do act by approaching danger, especially if they think they can't run away. So I think it would be an expected reaction.
But he could run away. I mean, the runaway option was there.
He couldn't really run away. He's not mobile on his stumps.
It's for the court to decide on the facts. But this whole report does not, at any of the 10 pages, make any reference to the most important leg of what the state submits now to you, and that is an incapacity of appreciating wrongfulness or to act accordingly. That's not the report. And all that it is to say, should there be facts before the court?
So, despite a robust objection from his defence team, Oscar Pistorius will find out tomorrow if he's to be sent to a mental institution for evaluation. We asked forensic psychologist Franco Visser and legal expert Llewellyn Kerr-Lewis for their assessment of today's developments.
The court must now distinguish between the wordings and the wordings of the Act, namely mental illness, mental defect, and the words used by Dr. Foster, namely disorder.
Yes, she herself said in testimony this afternoon or early on today that the case might benefit from a referral to observation for a second opinion.
If that happens, won't you also agree that what Barry Roux actually created here is a perfect opportunity for Gary Nel to intervene and to put this question before court. In other words, he was forced to play his hand in terms of the Criminal Procedure Act, basically.
Definitely, and I do not know if he actually realizes what he started here, what process he started here, because this can go any which way direction.
It is a can of worms that was opened up here.
Definitely.
What is the practical implication of such a referral for 30 days observation?
Usually what happens is that they have to bring the application, which I am sure that Mr. Nell will do to court, that Mr. Pistorius be referred for observation, where after they have to apply at the local psychiatric hospital, which is Westkopje Psychiatric Hospital, and check for availability of beds. This can imply a delay of how many ever days, months, weeks, until they have a bed for him, or if they decide to see him on an outpatient basis for observation. And then obviously he has to stay for a period of 30 days.
If, for example, after the 30 days, the experts conclude that he was not of sound and sober mind, in other words, he had a mental defect, what would be the implications according to you?
Well, I don't know what the implications for the court will be, because the court will then have to decide or Mr. Roux has to decide if he's going to change the basis of his defence, because as it is at present, the defence is he did not intentionally kill his steenkamp. So if they find that his mental illness, which the mental disorder as testified by Dr. Foster today, proves that that his responsibility is diminished, they will have to rethink their stance as to their defence, and this can imply that the case takes a whole new course.
Why was it only raised now and not initially? Surely they should have consulted with the experts in advance before calling her to the witness stand.
They're trying to pull all stops. I think they're trying everything that they possibly can to strengthen their case. And I do not think that this was a well thought through act of bringing Dr. Foster in today.
Tomorrow, Judge Masipa will decide whether to refer Oscar Pistorius for assessment. Remember, you can watch continuing coverage of the trial on Sky News, and there's a special catch-up programme each night.